I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West.
Pete, we are back from our little summer break.
I missed you.
I missed you too.
I missed you more.
Too. No, I don't think that's true. I think I missed you more.
We'll argue about it later.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe we can I don't know, use that as a little segue to say, so today we're going to be talking about sadness because, as there's a dialectic at play here. Obviously, Pete and I are very happy to see each other once again and be back talking to you guys, though we are also simultaneously sad that our summer vacation is over.
You had to start right into a dialectic. Like you couldn't, our break meant you had to just get another dialectic out there as quickly as possible.
Well, you know me, even on the break, I never put dialecticks away. They're always they're how I experience and frame the world. So I had to go there. So Pete, I don't know. I obviously want to give some evolutionary psychoeducation here about the function of sadness, because I would say patients to me are always like, well, I can understand why we have anxiety, but what's the point of sadness? I'm just wondering, I don't know, like what's sort of your experience clinically with sadness? Do people sort of go like, what's the point of this emotion?
Well, that's a judgment.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So I can help them recognize the judgment of it. And for any listener out there, this is a generalizable, universal emotion. Everybody that walks the planet feels sad.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, and that's because, I guess, dive right in here to evolutionary stuff, because it's hardwired into us as one of the primary emotions. So I know we've talked about this on our other episodes that deal with emotion like anxiety and guilt. But the primary emotions, I know there's some argument if there's 6 or 8, but if we start with the 6, we've got joy.
Yes.
Anxiety/fear.
Yes.
Anger.
Yes.
Guilt.
Yes.
Disgust.
Yes.
Sadness.
Right.
And
then some throw in there that surprise.
Interest. Well, surprise.
Contempt.
And it was surprise and then interest. That's the other one. I like the 8. I go with the 8. But anyway, so, I think it's often like, if I go back to the anxiety example, it's obvious to people a lot of times why we feel fear, right? I'll ask people, what was the point of that? It's like, you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. Anxiety, fear tells you this is dangerous.
Yes.
Get the heck out of there, right? Run away. Mm-hmm. But people will be like, well, what's the point of sadness? Why would evolution select for that? Because it just feels awful. Yes. So what I let people know is, look, evolution selected for emotions because they give us information in the moment, right? Especially before we had language. Think of all of our, other animal friends here in the world. They don't have language, but emotions tell them something about what to do. So sadness tells us that we've either lost something or have the potential to lose something of meaning to us. Right? So, can you say a little bit about like why that would be important from an evolutionary perspective? Like, why would we want to be aware of the fact that we could lose something of meaning to us? Why would evolution care about that?
Well, you want to keep the things close. I mean, we in Buddhism, we would look at like, really, I oftentimes a lot of the literature says that sadness is a gift within Buddhism.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's really tricky for some people to understand. And it kind of reminds me of just some of like Brene Brown's work, where we want to choose. We think we can choose how to feel. Or like, I want to choose the positive stuff and then just push all away the negative stuff. I want to drink or eat some Oreos but those, like you said, it gives us data and reminds us about what's important to us and
connection.
And connection. Right? Yeah.
Right. Because if we didn't have the potential to feel sad, we wouldn't care about anything. Right. So like I always say to people, like, again, think from an evolutionary perspective, like, if you didn't 40,000 years ago, if you were not motivated at all to feel connected to other people, what happened?
Exactly.
You didn't.
Like,
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No.
I'm like, no, you. No, you. It's like we humans are a social species. 40,000 years ago, if you weren't part of your group of humans, I'm always like, you died out there. You froze to death. You got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. You fell off a cliff, whatever happened. And so we wanted to be motivated to connect. Yeah. And so the other side of that is, you want to have you want meaning, you want connection, but we can't have that desire without knowing that we're also going to lose that. And so because that's a part of our experience too, sadness, then also from an action standpoint, an action urge is the term we use in behaviorism, tells us to go inward, to withdraw, to recharge during those times. But if we didn't feel sad, if we didn't have we just wouldn't care about anything.
And I felt sad at times this summer. I think it was, as we took a little break from recording and, thought about, I noticed that this beginning of a school year, so I wonder if any listeners had a similar experience, especially because I think school is a thing that most of us have. I happen to have it in a really strong way as somebody who's like on that academic cycle.
Yes. Yeah.
But like, I don't know, if you're scrolling social media in the last week or so, you're likely seeing all like the back to school pictures and, there's a sadness of that, and that's not a bad thing. It's not, we don't judge it. We just recognize that for us on the East Coast, it's also this realization and acceptance that it's about to be this change, of season. And that's why, go ahead. Well, that's why I love the Buddhism stuff, because the change of the season holds on to the summer or the sunlight and doesn't allow for the darkness and the cold. And then after the darkness and the colds comes more sunlight and long days. So that's the cyclical aspect of life. And sadness is just a way that it makes it possible to actually gain more, because the sadness gains this idea of like contemplating the impermanence.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you're bringing that in, because it's like, again, that concept of change, obviously, which is, I know, a big part of Buddhism, that, everything's always
and
changing.
Nobody here in the West likes.
Yeah, right. But Pete and I like quite a bit.
Yes.
And
I think change keeps us in business half the time.
Well, it does. It does. And it's also, but it's inherent in change is loss.
Yes,
is
correct.
Losing something. So
Absolutely,
it's like that things are moving. And so as humans, we, the way we talk about this a lot here on When East Meets West, our brains they try to fight that. They try to stick on a linear path and, only feel comfortable feelings. And the thing is like, no, we're constantly losing and we're constantly gaining. We're constantly losing and we're constantly gaining. And other animals, they don't struggle with sadness the way that we do. Like if anybody, look, all other animals feel sadness too, right? Like we talked about this on our episode.
I know you're going here, the elephant funeral. Go ahead.
Oh, I know. Well, I was just going to reference it lightly because it's like, I was actually going to talk about dogs. Shocker. But yeah, so listen, if you haven't listened to our grief episode, we talk a lot about this as well. But, if anybody has, I don't know cats so well, so I don't know. Cats are different.
Don't be mad at us.
Yeah, don't be mad at us. I don't know how they exhibit sadness, but dogs feel sad. They can feel sad when you're like, my dog, when I'm, leaving for the workday, literally like hunches his shoulders and looks at me like he's bummed out. So he's also okay. They're much more accepting of, or not much more. They are accepting. They're very mindful, right? So they allow the changes to happen, right? And they can roll with that. Humans, we're not so great at that. We often view sadness, like we view anxiety, as something quote unquote bad, as a judgment, but it's just giving us information, right? Like I would honestly ask people to think about, again, I'm going to go back to this concept of if you didn't have the potential to feel sad, you wouldn't care about anything.
It's purposeful. And what's coming to mind for me is the definition of mindfulness, because the way we've gone over that several times, but the way that I really think about it from a psychology perspective with the Buddhism is we're often like, our suffering is almost always rooted in something we're holding on to from the past or worry about the future. I mean, that's one of the basic teachings underlying it. I'm going to take a little tangent. Can I?
Go for it. Yeah.
So I was one of our teachers within my Zen community was giving a talk and she was referencing some of these more like 20th, 21st century Zen teachers. And what her reference was that she liked because they were more philosophical and not psychological. So I, of course, felt very defensive around that.
You're like, excuse me.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and because while they are I always have said that it's integrated for me without a doubt. I still feel the way that I do it in the psychological context is spiritually based. And I also, right.
Same. I mean, same.
I know, right. Because we're the same person, but
yeah.
but also it was like, you know, and I appreciated the context, you know, and again, it's about lens and perspective, because my lens is as a psychologist or as an educator, she doesn't have those lenses.
Sure.
So of course you'll see it from a more like secular perspective than someone like you and I who are clinical in how we do this. So, you know, I say all that because when I'm dealing with sadness with a client or myself, I just have to be in that moment, because what was happening for me was I don't know, is this a thing like September scaries?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I didn't
make that up.
No, I mean, well, I don't know if people say that to people. I know people say Sunday scaries.
Right.
But there is the like feeling of the back to school feeling.
Well, so that's what
down.
I was feeling. Which was, and where is that, Nikki? Is that in the past, the present, or the future? In that moment?
Well, it's funny. Well, sometimes it's in the present, because if you're like, I'm going back to school, it might be happening that day. It might be happening, but it can also be the anticipation, right?
It was the anticipation for me. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I was going to say that I think, you know, I went to a lot of school, unfortunately, I don't know. So I'm very familiar, fortunately, okay. Familiar with that feeling, though. It is interesting between the East Coast and West Coast. I felt it much more intensely on the East Coast because of the changes in seasons. We're here, you know, it's September 2021. It's still summer here. You know, the weather's amazing. But I think I want to make sure we don't end this episode without also talking about depression a little bit. We'll do an episode on depression. And again, I know we talked about it in the grief episode, but it is often, I think, confusing for people, what is sadness and what is depression. And I think it's important to clarify for listeners. And everybody will feel depressed at some time, right? Like that's a normal human experience. But if we want to use some sort of a Western lens, I would define depression as something more clinical, something more biologically related. And again, depression can be triggered by an environmental event, so I don't want to ignore that. But sadness is a baseline expected part of our experiences. And depression, while very common, we wouldn't say this is, I don't know, everybody is going to feel depressed. I mean, yes and no, not necessarily. Right.
Yeah, I'm with you with that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because I think that's important to say, because I think people can become afraid of sadness because they're afraid of going to depression.
So would you say like sadness is the symptom in a way, and like depression is the diagnosis?
That's an interesting question. I wouldn't define it that way, because I wouldn't say sadness is a symptom. I would say, because depression itself is also a symptom. Depression is a diagnosis, but we can have depressive symptoms. Like if you're feeling a depressive mood state, it feels different than a sadness mood state. And I would personally distinguish those as depression has a very like leaden, heavy, lethargic, dark sensation, where sadness, there's more space around it. That's what I would say. I don't know. Does that resonate with you at all?
I think we're looking at the spectrum and the fluidity of things. And so the way I'm seeing it is like this pendulum, where sadness is a little less severe than depression is probably more severe.
And less sticky.
I'm with you with that. And so one way that I help, or at least work through that with people, is what we call like understanding your why. And that's also, so you and I earlier talked about like the spirituality of what we do. And for me, that's what that is, you know. So I was with a team recently, and, you know, they were like talking about how like the coaches were getting on them, and it was really like, you know, feeling like a lot of pressure, and it was making them perform worse. And, you know, I was like, what's your why? Like, why does all that matter? Like, a coach is yelling at you. So what? You know, it feels really bad in the moment, and then what? And I tell the story of being in Toronto at the Olympic Center, where there's the center, this tower there that has a glass elevator. And so anyone that knows, I have my mom's genes with that, and so I don't love heights. And I was like, an elevator going up like 50 flights, glass,
not fun.
How would you feel about that? You'd be fine.
I'd be fine. I don't have a heights thing, but
Okay.
I understand. I understand why. I understand why that would be distressing for anyone. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the usher there was just like, sir, with all due respect, we're on this rock that's just like orbiting the sun on this thing that we don't even understand. Like, really, what is this tower? And I was like, amen. Like I got it in that moment, and I went up. I looked at the door. I didn't look out, but I looked out as I arrived and the door opened. But yeah. So the why, like, what is it? Like, there's such a bigger meaning in all this stuff that we're in, even in all the sadness that we experience.
Well, so is that what you, so if somebody is experiencing sadness, it sounds like try to help people connect with, again, it's like, what's the meaning in it?
What's
like,
meaning of it? Exactly.
What's the meaning of it? Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and it's so interesting is it's like, that is the thing I think people have such a hard time getting curious around because
they're afraid of depression, like you just said.
So depression, yeah, and it's so unpleasant. Like, and this is actually just sort of crystallizing for me. I think also why it's important to distinguish between sadness and depression is that because depression, there are like actionable steps to get out of it, right? Even clinically, right? Like we go like, in cognitive behavioral therapies, one of the first lines of defense is behavioral activation, which is a fancy term for just doing things. Right? Like, right, it is. So it's like having structure and behaviorally activating, right? So starting to do things, and that's going to start to regulate mood. So when people feel sad, and I experience it in therapy all the time, when they're just having sadness that isn't depression, and let's say maybe we've done some work around depression in the past, their first mode is to go to like, I got to get out of it. I got to get out of it. And I really bring them back to like, this isn't something to fix, right? Like this is something to bring compassion and love and kindness and space to.
Yes.
And the word I use a lot is honoring it.
Yeah.
Right. Because like you're saying, it's like honor the why, honor the meaning, right? Yeah. Honor that this is information that your brain is telling you that you've lost something meaningful to you, right? Or there's the potential to lose something.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that you brought in like this fear that people have, that as if sadness directly leads to this like deep, sticky depression, because there is research that has shown, the negative effects of sadness. And in fact, there was this study in 2020 that was published by Dorison and his colleagues that found that sadness compared to like sadness separated itself from other negative emotions and did contribute to like smoking and some other like unhealthy behaviors. And I think that that's important to recognize, because fear, anger, and shame did not have the same impact. As they controlled for it.
Well, which makes sense, right? Because sadness, again, you were just saying about the fluidity in the spectrum.
That's right.
It can lead to it, right? So I don't want to suggest that it can, it's not black and white here. Though, what's interesting is that it's this paradox, and I always talk about, like, if you allow that, if you honor that sadness and you make space for it, connect with it, don't judge it.
Yeah.
That's going to help you move through it.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're trying to fight it, or like, so you're trying to get rid of it, or the opposite is you dive to the bottom of the pool with it. So you ruminate, you use a negative lens in how you're thinking about everything. That is both of those things, running away from it or clinging to it, are going to intensify it and lead.
Said like a beautiful mindfulness practitioner.
or a clinical psychologist, right?
Yes. That's, I mean, I can't believe this is, it's so good to be back already. I can't believe that we're almost done already. Time flies when you're having fun.
when you're having fun talking about sadness. Time flies when you're talking about being sad. I don't think anyone has ever said those words. I love that.
You just did.
I did.
For the September scaries, for any listeners out there, I think I wanted on the East Coast here, certainly like with the seasonal change, and that's, I think, another metaphor of just embracing the winter. And I've seen that all over and again. Like, it's not great, but it's just change.
Yeah, it's just change. And so, I mean, what I want listeners to take away from this episode is that sadness serves a function, right? Evolution's selected for it for a reason. And even though it's really unpleasant, I want people to see if they can make space for it and honor it, because it's helping you identify what's important to you and what's meaningful to you.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin.
And I'm Dr. Pete Economo. Be present, be brave. This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.